Hi, everyone. Welcome to the monthly art talks at the Sasse Museum of Art. And this month, we're going to be talking with three photographers. I'm going to have them introduce us in a minute, but I just want to say also, if you want to, there are lots of ways of supporting the museum. This is my favorite way, right? Every month I have some tea through this. You can buy that and support the art. You can also become a member of the museum. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. I'm actually living in New York now, and my membership translates out here. I've been going for free to museums in Erie, Pennsylvania, and all over the place with the Sasse Museum card. So it's a great investment. All right, I'm going to ask the photographers to briefly introduce themselves, and we have May, Fatima, and Nada. So May, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mei Shan Chu, and I believe that the work that was shown in the catalog, this is for this art talk, is from a series called "Let a Thousand Flowers Bloom," which is which sort of takes its pointers from the 100 Flowers movement of 1957 that began with Chairman Mao. But the work is really a bit of a farce of a Chinese takeover of the United States, but all the actors in it are actually Pan-Asian American, and they are wearing these uniforms that come from a Beijing photo studio where tourists come and they reenact cultural revolution era imagery to bring home as cultural souvenirs. So that's just a very brief introduction.
Thank you. And Fatima, could you please introduce?
Yes, thank you. My name is Fatima Burns, and I'm actually a painter and a photographer, and work with both medium. And primarily, I was trained to work in darkroom and straightforward photography, and later on, technically speaking, I started experimenting with camera, and the work became a lot more experimental and conceptual. And I make photographs.
I'm on the Zoom, but I'm.
Okay, go ahead. I've muted her.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Basically, my photography is in parallel to my paintings, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Okay, and
thank you for having me here.
Nada, would you introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, I'm Nada Osline. I'm a photographer, and increasingly I've been working in film and video. The work that I'm showing at the Sasse is it's actually the first time in a long time that I've done any kind of straightforward photography in the desert, and so it was really kind of I guess we'll be showing some images, right? Because it was really kind of uplifting, because I'll get into these more kind of complicated projects that will take like a really long time, and I sort of just kind of fell into this particular project out in the Mojave Desert, photographing end stage yucca plants. But I think when we show them, I could talk about that a little bit more. Is that
Yeah.
Is that the idea here? Yeah. Okay.
Well, maybe we could start with that. And I also wanted to invite anybody to ask questions. You can just ask them, just make sure you're muted otherwise, but just you can just pipe up and ask questions, or you can put in the chat and I'll try to voice your questions for you. But maybe we could start with Nada's Joshua Tree pictures, since we're there. And these are absolutely fascinating. And I love before the meeting, we were talking a little bit about how these kind of look like people.
Yeah. So like I said, it'd been a long time since I'd done any straight photography in the desert, but I was out at a residence, which I'm actually going to talk about a little bit. I really enjoyed doing a residency, every 2 or 3 years. And I especially like residencies where I can return. So this particular one is called Mystery Ranch, and it's in southwestern Nevada, kind of the little tip of Nevada, and near Las Vegas and kind of Laughlin. And I was going out there to, it's a historic cabin that the operator, Kim Garrison Means, who's an artist and an activist, she inherited it from her grandfather, and it's in a remote location. And she brings a lot of scientists and artists to the site. And so there's the historic cabin, but there's also these really cool little outcropping buildings. So she's got one that we stayed in, which is a camera obscura, and another one, which is kind of this tiny other sort of tiny house. And so they've done a lot of work out there, which I'm going to talk a little bit about after I talk about these pieces. But I wasn't really expecting to do this. We were out there working on a film. I'm working with my partner, who's a writer and a curator, Tyler Stallings, and films just take like a really long time to do. So we've been making several trips out there, and then every time I would go out there, I started to notice, can you flip to the other page with the images? Because I would, okay, so the one on the left, this one was like haunting me. And it just seemed to be sort of screaming at me every time I went out there. And the yuccas are, they're human scale. And so you really can't help but to anthropomorphize them. So I sort of went with that idea. And then in the beginning, I was looking for individuals, and they reminded me of migrants and shamans and elders and warriors and kings and queens. They just sort of, I felt like I was just like a witness watching them move silently through the desert. And I think because I was working in film, they're kind of shot in this cinematic format, and I was thinking of them as kind of in a cinematic way. Yeah, so, and they also appear to be kind of desiccated, so because they're kind of the end stage yuccas, so you really can't help but think about them as well. You can't help but think about drought and climate change. But then I started to also look for like these scenes. Like if you go back to the other page, I started to look for these kind of cinematic scenes. Like the one on the left looks to me very much like a crime scene in a way, or there were these family relations and things like that. But yeah, so I just kind of fell in love with them. And I've got I'm in the middle of working on the series. They're modest size, like I think 16 by 24, printed on like an ultra shiny paper, which has metallic undertones, which I think reflects like the desert. And also in the desert, like, and really anywhere in nature, it's sort of about seeing things that aren't there. Yeah, so I began to photograph these, and I'm about partway through the series. I estimate to be about 16 pieces at the end of the day. But I want to say a little bit about the property it's on, which is Mystery Ranch. It's the person that runs it is kind of amazing, and sort of like about art and activism together. But she brings like scientists, like I said, and artists out there to do a lot of projects. But very significantly, the property is located within an area that's adjacent to a site called Spirit Mountain, or a Vikwame, and it's an area where there's over 10, I think, native tribes consider it a site of a sacred place and an origin point. And also there's so what happened was a coalition of people got together, botanists, environmentalists, artists, and Kim, who runs Mystery Ranch, was a very big part of this. And they've been lobbying to get this particular site designated as a national monument. It's been on a list of historic places since around 1999, and it's about 443,000 acres, and they just now have it in Congress to be approved as this newest national monument. And there's a lot of conflicting interests in the area. So there's mining, there's Las Vegas, there's Laughlin, there's all these like solar energy and wind energy projects. So it's really significant that they were able to save this portion. It's a very biodiverse area. There's several different kind of climates that come together because it's at the very eastern edge of the Mojave. So it's a really interesting place. There was a beautiful article in the LA Times maybe a few weeks ago about it becoming a designated monument. So we're really excited about that. And I'm sure I'll make several more trips out there. Again, we're working on a film. So that takes a lot of visits, but I don't know, should I go on, or is that's probably good?
Yeah, but it's a sacred space, and you're filming it. Do you find any of the sacredness kind of translate into your art, into the way you shoot it, or what the result is?
I don't know about this particular series, but I mean, some things that have come out of it have been interesting that I think maybe more directly relate to that. We were kind of serendipitously hooked up with a Brazilian composer who works with, so we're working on a project with him, and he's back in Brazil now, but he was here for a while, and he references the work of a 19th century composer, Heitor Villa-Lobos, and what Villa-Lobos's whole trajectory was to combine folk music and indigenous music with classical music. And so he would to talk about the landscape, and the way he did it was he would take the horizon lines of landscape and create a musical score kind of based on that. So I took some photographs for the composer, whose name is Rodrigo Felicissimo, and he's working now on a composition. And once he's done with that, we're going to go back and I've been taking like a lot of video out there too. I've been really interested in time lapse, doing a lot of time lapse in the desert, because it has this like twitchiness of the desert where you can kind of see things move like a little bit. So we're going to work with him on doing the video for this composition, which then will have other elements to it, like spoken word. And yeah, so we're pretty excited about that. So I think that may more directly translate into kind of this idea of spirit mountain. And I mean, I hope these do that. I mean, I think that these are really kind of more about climate change and drought and kind of seeing things in the desert, and they're kind of muses or stand-ins for who we are.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we'll definitely come back and follow this up, but I want to take a look at some other work. And Fatima's work is much different and also fascinating. And you said a few minutes ago, Fatima, that you were a painter first. And I think we can really see that here. Is what you're doing? Are you trying to paint with photography?
Well, I mean, I make visual work, and I think it's essentially different experience when you use paints or the camera. But the challenges and the problem solving of each process is what's exciting to me. And a little bit of a background, because I was trained as a classical representational artist and also sort of straightforward photographer. And when I've studied photography, after a while, it's a long story to it, why I've shifted to photography for a period of time from being in the studio, which I actually did. I didn't paint for a few years, and I just took photographs and started with taking straight photography, traveling and not documenting, but experiencing part of the history and trying to find images from, for example, Dachau to East Berlin and some of the forests and minefields and so forth. But what was probably enchanting for me was to cross over documenting with photographs. And because I was trained as a perceptual artist, and everything was about really what I saw and maybe taking it to a higher level, but not necessarily just deconstructing it or transforming it. And with photography, and that became a challenge and kind of an exciting play. And I wanted to create images that they are painterly, but I really can't go back and rephotograph or create the same scene. And some of these photographs were done by creating settings as elaborate settings, like fake mirrors on the walls, and mostly open aperture dark rooms and motion. I've broken many cameras and lenses and everything moving, everything changing. And bottom line at the end would have been the surprise. And I was always excited to see what comes through. And a lot of the figures actually have had choreographers that I could actually take an image that it can show through. So it did become about light. It did become about painting or probably communicating my visual poetry through the instrument of through a lens. And some of the figures, there are some, actually one in particular in the exhibition that had to do a lot with some of the social circumstances. And I'm an activist, and if something would, a particular concept or issue or communication I would have with someone, then became I would become preoccupied with it. And this preoccupation will carry through, not necessarily to try to illustrate an image, but it would really haunt me to a point that it was just unescapable. It will always come through the work. And some about identities, about immigration, housing. So a lot of the contemporary issues are very important in terms of maybe partially narrative or focus in my work. And I can go on and on.
Yeah, well, we have two
this.
really interesting places that we're going here. You've got one that deals with, I believe, Sufi mysticism, and another that's dealing with an historical event, which is the Hiroshima. I wonder if you could talk about those two elements in your work.
Well, it's such a broad and talking about mysticism, but my parents were, I was raised actually in an environment by parents who they were Sufis, and I guess was great for me being an artist that it did not put any limitation on my imagination, although I separated from my parents very early on, and the benefit probably was at the young age. And then later on, as a visual artist, I was forced to kind of, maybe it was the time or my environment or my training, to make everything so accurate, to basically create a replica of what I saw. And maybe the sensibility would always be there, but especially I was a portrait artist, and from family to friends, everywhere I went, people were waiting for me with a pencil and a paper, and I always had to draw people. And some commissions, and on different scales, and teaching it and teaching anatomy and so forth. But it with the influence of a group of artists who I was involved with, and actually had a partner, and who they were actually minimalist or and also serious Buddhist, I kind of were exposed to what with nature. And one of my teachers was Joachim Smith, who he and I would take hikes and talk about nature, and a lot of things that I've learned from my parents I found through his practice. And I've learned a lot from these teachers, and it was at Cal State Fullerton, that environment. That's where actually I met Nada. And was it 80s, right, Nada? And we were all in the same school. And so I think this mystic, this openness to nature, to refinding it here in America, far away from home, and in completely different language and context, was quite magnificent for me. And it helped me to grow. Now, going back to Hiroshima as the subject matter of my work, I've always had curiosity because of my, again, personal history and my father, and I won't burden people with those personal narratives, but the human nature, what we can do, what we're capable of, and just many things don't make sense. And then the examination of our compassion, love, connection, and then cruelties. And I've have always been very, very impacted by these feelings and these situations in the world, and some from the past, and curiously always wanted to know and put things together and next to each other, see what happened. And sometimes it just would lead me to want to know more. And I have a background in science, and I became very interested in the impact, historical impact of Hiroshima, and reading some of the genetics and late data, and just started making a series, both in paintings and in photography, and some, again, other, I hate to say tragedies, but it seems to be a lot of my work has dealt with the cruelty of, or destructive nature, let's say, of our destructive nature. And but at the meantime, I find the beauty. I think it's, I don't know, the beauty is to create a balance, or is just always a part of it. I don't have an answer. I'm still just kind of floating, and because every day is today too. I mean,
Yeah.
And that's basically what kind of, I don't know if it's inspiration, but it motivates me and agitates me.
Well, I think this historical perspectives gives us a really good transition into May's work as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, and May, you were talking about the Let a Thousand Flowers Bloom and how that inspired that. I wonder if you can give us a little bit of background on that and what inspired these photographs.
Well, I was born as a Chinese minority in Indonesia, and at the time of my childhood, being Chinese was illegal, and so we didn't have much of a voice, and we weren't allowed to participate in government. So when we left Indonesia in response to some political turmoil, and we immigrated to the US, I was really interested in really just discovering what being Chinese meant, because I had been so identified for most of my life. And we had such a suppression of culture there that we didn't really understand what it entailed. So I went to China maybe 5 or 6 times, and I realized that in China, they were going through a really different type of kind of evolution, where they were trying to disregard a lot of what they considered their cultural history and replace it with our ideas of modernity. And so that's where the series came from, where I took these uniforms that were used for cultural tourism, and created these tableaus with kind of really Western motifs, classical Western motifs, where they are really the actors are Pan-Asian American artists and academics, the same group who would have been targeted if 100 Flowers movement did happen in the U.S.
Mhm. Could you explain the 100 Flowers movement?
The what? What was that? The 100 Flowers movement. So in 1957, when Mao made a declaration, he said, let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 schools of thought contend. And I think the Western translation is 1,000 flowers, but it's 100 flowers. And that caused a lot of people who were in hiding, people who didn't fit what he considered were people in his great society. And a lot of them were people who questioned things. They were academics and artists who came out of hiding, and they really, I guess where I took this was I thought, these people knew that this was a likely fatalistic move to come out of hiding, but they wanted so bad to believe in this idea of culture and this idea of intellectual and artistic freedom that they took that risk. And so there's this kind of inner utopia outside of a possible outer utopia within these pictures. And I did have a curator who noticed right away that these are not really Chinese, like these are not photographs that a Chinese photographer would make. This is a very Chinese American point of view. A Chinese photographer would never have these kind of images where that these faces are staring right back at the viewer. It's just not something that would be within their aesthetic lexicon. But this more resembled the kind of maybe more like the way that saints would be in Western, in maybe a Catholic or church where I was raised. I was raised in a very post-colonial environment. So,
well, you even referenced the Bible in the image to the left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And it was very influenced by stained glass windows quite a bit as a child, because I was made to wake up, and Indonesia is equatorial. So the sun rose every day at 6 a.m. and we were made to wake up in the dark and walk for an hour to go to the only Western edifice in the town, which was a church or cathedral. And right at sunrise, the light, which would come through the stained glass window, and there would be a Dutch priest who was the only Westerner there, and it had this kind of magic attached to it, this kind of otherness, the magic that was attached to the West, and it did influence a lot of my work, and it's made it very color saturated, very Southeast Asian though, in terms of its coloration.
Well, yeah, I found it fascinating. You've got these symbols of the West, but also you've got the symbol of the East. I'm looking at the image on the right with the cherry blossom, and you were saying that that's a tremendously significant symbol for you.
Yes, right, and so I use a lot of symbolism in my work, and because there is so much symbolism in Asia, but also I found it so fascinating that a lot of, for instance, Renaissance imagery, that it was also rife with symbolism. And I grew up in a batik shop. I'm from a batik family where it is a kind of a textile, which is really, really, really so important in Indonesian culture. And it's filled with symbols. There's a special fabric that you give at weddings, and a special fabric that important people wear, a special fabric that that maybe is just your symbol. So the cherry blossom in Asia is a symbol of feminine power, and also this idea of domesticity.
That's great.
At the same time.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take this off the image for a second, and I'd like to just invite everybody to join in the conversation at this point. Because there's a lot going on, and one of the things I'm I'm wondering is, what is the linkage between you three artists and the collective in general? Why did you all come together?
I guess I can start with that if you don't mind. And May and I've been in quite a few exhibitions in the past, and programs and feminist talks, and always cross path. And I've always really regarded her work in quite a bit. And also I've curated a show. Was it May last year or a year before at Tufenkian?
I thought it was last year.
Yeah, and
It was last year, definitely, because people actually came out. Like there was a lot of people that came out during the reception. It's one of the
it
first.
was interesting because we became reacquainted, and also I had to look at her work in much deeper level. And I always thought that, well, she photographs sets, and she's that theatrical element, that how
Right.
things composed. But I discovered further and saw that there's a lot of elements actually of taking chances, experimenting, playing. And at the time, she was also playing with these layerings of cutting through the top layer. And I've been wanting to try to create a group of experimental photographers. And I've talked to her. I said, it's sad because I don't see much of a support in experimental photography in LA. And we've both been in Photo LA quite a bit. And I really wanted to find partners or people who are interested, and we can just maybe create a collective. And she just was right on it. So we started kind of as a partner, and then looking into, and I've known Nada's work for also a long time, and I'm a big admirer of her work. And I actually curated a show of Nada and Tyler. That was what, Nada, 10 years ago? It was a beautiful show.
I think it might have been longer than that, Fatima.
Oh my God. But then it was quite fascinating because I know Nada since we used to be in the same dark room and working. And then when I was curating the show, discovering all this incredible work she was doing, especially you were working with scanning and transforming, from botanicals to figures, aging, and there's multiple layers and layers of perception, and also I would say dreaming and wanting to expand, what's around us. And because I've seen, when I think you were at Grand Central doing your was it a residency there? You worked right.
The portrait,
so
the art portraits,
that is correct. So I think it just naturally we start asking people about, and then the collective kind of grew from being just experimental to a lot more. That I'm going to let maybe May, you want to continue?
Well, yes, we want to really have the collective focus on something that we thought was really so interesting, and that has to do with kind of the multiplicity of talents, and that I think most people, contemporary people, actually seem to have, especially people in Southern California.
The poly artist.
The poly artist. So we came up with it, right? So the idea was poly artists who dabbled, or not dabbled, well, that worked in more than one medium and methodology. So maybe photography and film, like Nada, or I know that, for instance, Neil, who's also here and is in the collective, he does also sculpture, and he makes rugs, and he's also a painter as well. And I think that it would be quite interesting in the future, Jean, to have an exhibit where we showed these multiple mediums
Side by side. yeah.
side by side of each artist.
And if I may interrupt, I think also the context of the days, because May and I had many conversations, and our mission is based on overlaps. Now, here specifically would be about the means of expression, but we at the time that we all have experienced this separations, and especially where we come from, being an immigrant. So it would be so great to see all these overlaps, and which they carry the depth of sensibility of maybe the same person, or these different perspectives or histories, or it just, I think I'm going to learn so much from it, and even opening many, many doors. So I'll be hoping our next exhibit will be about putting side by side, maybe Nada's film and photographs, or my paintings, and or installations I've made. So or Neil's, it just right now our group is not just a coincidence, but I think there are a group of artists who they're not restricted, and they break those boundaries. They play.
That's just out of curiosity, May. What is you do photography, and what other medium?
Well, I do quite a bit of video actually, and I come from being a painter, so a lot of my photography is actually
Installations.
And installations is very
beautiful.
Paint like through that view of a painter. Photographers tend to do things in series, and I sometimes, when you look at a painting is in itself a piece, and which I think is interesting, because I see that Fatima's photography, it is approached as, it's a whole, each piece is a whole, and I do all kinds of things. So I wish, John, that you could come to my installation and see the synthetic organ that I created there, that combines sound, scent, and imagery.
I mean, most of us are activists in one way or another. And they are very involved.
Yes,
in our practice.
Definitely.
Okay.
Social practice.
So do you see your art as part of the social practice?
Are you asking me? Or?
Anyone?
Yes, definitely.
So, okay. And you May are specifically bringing to life historic events, at least in this show, and how they relate to the present tense.
Yes. For instance, the piece that I have right now, the installation, is called The New Woman and the Modern Girl. And it just invites the viewer to really, through this kind of a multi-sensory process, to really come to their own conclusion in terms of what their belief is in terms with this kind of the woman question that occurred in Shanghai, I think in the lower half of the 20th century, whether it was going to be the new woman who was going to be the perfect mother, and the perfect citizen, or the modern girl who was really a creature who was trying to find herself and was considered maybe a little bit more what do you call it, who was not perfect, who was maybe too westernized, or too or who didn't do things the right way, because she was struggling to find her own identity.
A purist. Well, I mean, this whole feminine, the whole idea of what you're talking about, it's today what's happening in Iran with women and women's rights. It's just incredible. I mean, I'm personally just waiting to hear more and see if people are aware of what's going on in Iran. And so when you ask me, like, I'm sure this will be a part of, now I'm not going to create images that to just show what's exactly happening, but how could you not be impacted by seeing what's happening to women, these incredible people, even young people, these ones are being murdered every day from age 15, 16, you know, I mean, of course, I'm not trying to be critical of media or anything right now, but there's not, I have to go online to BBC and a whole bunch of other places to actually find out what's going on. And it's really sad. So how could you not be impacted? I mean, here I am, a woman sitting here talking and trying to exercise and practice within my rights and also be conscious and sensitive to everyone else's.
So your art is a statement of witness, at least to some degree?
It's really, I mean, how could you, I think it's about being present. I mean, we're here and artists, everything we do, even though we're quiet and we are on our own space, but if you, for example, what does knowledge mean if you cannot pass it along? It means nothing. What does money mean if it doesn't do anything? Wealth, but I think it's really important for artists to, we just can't help it. We are impacted. We are here to communicate, to connect.
I'm interested in the way that Neda does it too, and I'm actually looking behind you at your botanical photography. I wonder if you could talk about that. We talked the other day about kinds of things you're doing with tobacco plants and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of series that kind of I do subsequent. So for about 10 years, I've been working on, I've been interested in like the history of medicine and then the history of plants that have had a significant impact on, I guess, global economies, things that have challenged beliefs, caused violence, fueled addiction, promoted spirituality, raised consciousness, inspired art, and generated legislation. So I've been interested in plants like the plants behind me are grew tobacco, and I placed, I mean, tobacco at this point, I've never been a tobacco smoker, but tobacco has a really incredibly interesting history, particularly after first contact between the Americas and Europe, and where they didn't kind of know like what to do with it. And so I grew this tobacco, and I put tattoos on the leaves. The leaves are just beautifully large. Then the tattoos, they're not meant to be didactic, but they reference the history of tobacco and ideas about addiction. And I dried the leaves and I sort of put them together in bunches as people dry them. And they came out looking like, they're fairly large, although they don't look like that here, but they came out looking like, I guess like maps or lungs or skin, and then the tattoos are on them. But the other plants, I grow the plants myself. So it takes like a long time because I fail a lot, and I'm growing these plants in Huntington Beach and they're not meant to be there. So I've grown a lot of different things like ephedra, which is a Chinese ephedra, which is kind of as it has a pseudoephedrine in it, which is kind of related to, I guess it's a speed, like methamphetamine, that kind of thing. And they all have, I mean, it's like opium. I grew opium poppies, which are legal to grow, but I was interested in, I guess like opium being, and it's all one-liners now. It's like, okay, opium's bad for you, but opium revolutionized pain medication, and so it was a big deal at back in the day. So I've worked with plants like Brugmansia, Datura, again, opium, tobacco, cannabis, magic mushrooms. I mean, there's a little dialogue now around that, helping with PTSD and people's I mean, people that have had like under supervision, psilocybin experiences have said it was actually the most spiritual thing that's happened in their life, the most significant spiritual thing. So there's a lot of dialogue around it now. Obviously, the dialogue around cannabis and that sort of thing. So that's been that's like an ongoing project. Yeah.
So it's yours is more than just witness. It sounds like it's also conversation.
Yeah, it's I've shown the work, and people really like to talk about like their own experiences, but my work's it's not about like me taking the plants, and there is people that do work about that, so it's not about like my own experience of taking the plants. It's really an homage, I guess, to these significant plants that have they're just plants, like I was in Colombia, so I was able to find coca, coffee, cacao, some of those plants. So it's really kind of just sort of placing them up like plant gods, because the pieces are fairly large scale, maybe like 5 feet by a few feet. So, and I try to make them, I was really influenced by the early botanical imagery, where I guess European botanists were traveling around the world and recording these plants for the first time. And you can really, when you look at those, you could really like feel the energy of excitement and discovery for those particular botanists. And I love the early drawings where there's like a like this, there's these wild scale shifts and other elements in them, like birds and insects and things like that. So I try to make them quite beautiful, actually.
Are they scanned or they photographs?
No, I photograph them. I grow them, so I photograph them along the way, and then I recombine them. So because when they bloom, obviously I take a bunch of pictures. Like I recently did a piece on belladonna, Atropa belladonna, which in Victorian times people used to dilate their eyes. And actually, it has, like, now I can't remember the substance that it is. But when I was at the eye doctor, I'm like, do you use this? And he's like, well, if we use that, your eyes would be dilated for several days. But they do still use a version of what's in belladonna to dilate your pupils when you go to the doctor. And there's a medicinal use for a lot of it, like datura has a really dark history, but it's also has this substance scopolamine, which is used for motion sickness. So, I mean, it's the beginnings of medicine. These are, it's not just like things to make you high, but I look for plants that have had that relationship with humans, that enter your body, that people have had a relationship with.
And also used in really political ways in a lot of ways, like tobacco and.
I don't see it that way, but because I'm not really telling people something's bad or good. I'm just merely presenting the plants, and I have a personal relationship with them from growing them. And yeah, I try to make the pieces look, there's no examples here, but I try to make them look like believable. So I place them within the landscape, usually related to the place that they're from.
I think the cultural context of them itself.
There's
fascinating.
Yeah, so the one on the left is belladonna, and it's over London, and it's belladonna I tried to grow like 3 times. And then there's an example on the right of the one of the tobacco images.
They're beautiful.
Yeah,
They are.
They really are. Yeah, thank you for that, Jean. All right, I think we have time for a question from anybody. Maybe one last statement, if anybody has a question or if anybody has a statement. That could be from the artists or from the audience. Okay, it doesn't look like anybody has any questions. All right. Okay, so is there a unifying theme? This will be the last question. A unifying theme to the show that you're a part of, or is it just like this is us?
Um, God, I think in my perspective, it was just one, the individual artists, two, we all share we photographers,
Okay.
and have definitely the social awareness and practice. And the beauty of it was how to bring them together. It was more of being a conversation, because it was great to have all these different voices to come together, and it was kind of scary first, but I think it really did synchronize well.
This is actually the first exhibit of the collectives, and so we're really excited to do
Wow.
projects together and have a further dialogue in the future.
And it was quick. The time
Yeah, along
around
with-
was very quick.
Along with
yeah.
that exhibit, there's also two other photo exhibits in there. Landscape and animals of Mike and Nancy Karen, and also a historical one in the other side. So it's
Hmm.
quite a lot of different images that are all sort of mixed up together and things. So
Well, the museum is quite a large space, so you're able to get a lot in there.
You know, I was just surprised because Neil didn't say much. Are you there, Neil?
Yes,
Here.
I would like to invite Neil.
Yeah,
last,
please, just.
part
you-
to
you-
maybe.
You
Well,
are part of our
I-
collective, and
I thought it was, I'm happy to be invited in, and it was a pleasure to watch the show develop, and a pleasure to kind of come back and see it up. When I left, it wasn't installed. And to see the other work that's in there besides, I thought there's some wonderful work in the show.
how
Yeah.
about a little bit about you?
Me,
Uh-huh. I mean, you have
well,
a very
I mean,
extensive history.
well, I didn't step up too much because I wasn't part of the catalog at this point, and I thought that it should be those that are. But yeah, this show did come up very quickly. It was not time to frame things and put up the most recent work. But I'm really happy to show the work I showed or am showing. My background was I'm from the East Coast. My background was in sculpture, and before that it was photography, and came out here and went to film school in Los Angeles, and worked in that a little bit, and that kind of carried me back into the art world and working for galleries or public galleries, artist-run spaces, and then having co-ran a art gallery with a partner for a while, and I do a lot of political graphics because it kind of stick with you, Bettina, about injustice and issues. That doesn't show up in a lot of my work, but there is a chapter of that in mine, because I think where it's hit me after a few that I did during the last presidential administration, I was sort of silenced a little bit because I realized I wasn't changing anything. And I was looking at myself going, well, it's not being distributed across the planet. And I don't know what will wake up our species. I am a little negative on that. I'm happy to be working. I'm happy to have a family and a child and a wonderful dog, see the sun come up and see the sun come down, go down, but the authoritarianism that's starting to cross our planet and the total ignorance of a lot of people to see the truth. So you might
And
not,
that's
you might not want
global.
me to be talking right now.
That's global. Do you share your graphic, like your, how do they manifest in terms of physicality? Are they books or
I've,
objects?
let's see. Where'd I go? Choose.
Do you
Because
publish it?
Neil, you're a Dadaist, right? You done-
Yeah, I started a group with a partner artist in town a long time ago. And we did performance art, and it came out of Dada. And to me, the Dada wasn't an art movement. It was a political movement as well. It was artists standing up for the atrocities of World War I. And for me, that when I've said before, when Dada was born, it was slapped across the face. And it's, you know, not a pretty picture. And I'm really surprised that it's kind of flipping the way it is now. This is a poster that I carried to the first Women's March behind me, and did as a graphic and a postcard, and I mailed out about 1,000 of them. And this TNT on there is actually stands for my son and I, because before Donald Trump was elected to office, just starting to run, he came out and went with his big mouth and his little hands. And so there came Trumpsaurus Rex. And I'm sorry to say how true that is. So this is another graphic. And it's One People, One World. So that's, you can't read all the type on it. But I'm taking up too much time, I feel. Let's move it to someone else.
Well, I mean,
Save
that, that's a great impetus to go and visit the gallery, right? Which is downtown Pomona. You could make it. It's actually downtown Pomona if you can't make it.
Yes, and we, most of us will be there on 12th during the Pomona Art Walk, and we hope to see you there.
That's
We
great.
meet you in person.
Well, thank you,
Hope I
Jean.
wasn't Debbie Downer.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, John.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. And
Thank you, John.
thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.